Axel's snarl tore through the lobby like a warning siren, and everything stopped. Handler Reese Mallory had worked with the Belgian Malinois for 4 years. Through riots and raids, through armed standoffs and crowd control chaos, and she had never, not once, seen him react like this. The dog's body went rigid, every muscle coiled tight, his lips peeling back to expose teeth that gleamed white under the fluorescent lights. The sound that came from deep in his chest wasn't the controlled alert bark he used on suspects. It was primal, protective, desperate, and it was aimed directly at Vernon Kitch. Vernon, the friendly transit worker who'd been bringing little Phoebe to the station for weeks now. Vernon, who always smiled that easy, helpful smile and explained he'd found the girl wandering near bus stops or train platforms, who always said he wanted to make sure she got somewhere safe. Vernon, who stood there now in his Navy transit uniform with one hand resting gently on Phoebe's thin shoulder, his expression shifting from pleasant to confused as Axel lunged forward against the leash with enough force to nearly yank Reese off her feet. "Axel, stand down." Reese's voice came out steady, but her pulse hammered in her throat. She tightened her grip on the lead, boots squeaking against the tile as she braced herself. The dog didn't stand down. He pulled harder, claws scraping, every fiber of his being focused on the man in front of them. His bark echoed off the walls, sharp and relentless, and Phoebe flinched, not away from the dog, but toward him. Her small body shifted instinctively closer to Axel, away from Vernon's touch. That movement, that tiny, almost invisible step, made Reese's blood turn cold. "Whoa, hey, easy there, buddy." Vernon raised his free hand in a calming gesture, his smile still in place, but thinner now, his eyes darting between the dog and Reese. "He okay? I've been bringing Phoebe here for a while now. Never had a problem before." Reese didn't answer right away. She was watching Phoebe. The girl was 7, maybe 8 years old, small for her age, with tangled brown hair and a faded pink backpack that looked too big on her narrow frame. She'd been appearing at the station almost daily for the past 3 weeks, always quiet, always trailing behind Axel as he made his rounds through the building. The officers had started keeping granola bars at the front desk for her. Reese had assumed she was a local kid, maybe a latchkey situation, maybe drawn to the safety of the station and the comfort of a dog who never asked questions. It had seemed innocent, sweet even. But Phoebe wasn't looking at Vernon now. She was staring at Axel, and her dark eyes were wide, not with fear of the dog, but with something else, something that looked like recognition, like relief. "Axel, heel." Reese's command was firmer this time, and the dog obeyed, barely. He stopped lunging, but his body stayed tense, his gaze locked on Vernon like a predator tracking prey. His ears were pinned flat, his tail low and stiff. Every line of his posture screamed threat, and Reese had learned long ago to trust that instinct more than she trusted her own eyes. Vernon's smile faltered, just for a second, just long enough for Reese to see something flicker behind it, something cold and calculating that didn't match the friendly transit worker routine. Then it was gone, smoothed over again, and he shrugged with an apologetic little laugh. "Guess he's having an off day, huh? Anyway, I found Phoebe over by the Green Line platform again. Thought I'd bring her by before I clocked out." He glanced down at the girl, his hand still resting on her shoulder, fingers curled just slightly. "You know how kids are, always wandering off." Phoebe didn't nod. She didn't smile. She just stood there, silent and small, her hands gripping the straps of her backpack so tightly her knuckles were white. Reese forced herself to breathe evenly, to keep her expression neutral even as her mind raced. She'd seen Vernon bring Phoebe in at least a dozen times over the past few weeks, maybe more. Always the same story. Found her near a transit stop, didn't want to leave her alone, brought her to the station because it was safe. The other officers had thanked him, called him a good Samaritan, offered him coffee. No one had questioned it. Why would they? He worked for the City Transit Authority. He wore a uniform. He smiled. But Axel had never reacted to him before. Not like this. "I'll take it from here," Reese said quietly, stepping forward, and positioning herself between Vernon and the girl. She didn't make it obvious, didn't square up or shift her weight like she was preparing for a confrontation. But she moved with purpose, and Axel moved with her, his body a solid wall of muscle and fur at her side. "Thanks for bringing her in." Vernon's eyes narrowed just a fraction, and for a moment Reese thought he might argue. His hand tightened on Phoebe's shoulder, and the girl winced. Just the smallest twitch of pain, there and gone so fast most people would have missed it. Reese didn't miss it. Neither did Axel. The dog's growl rolled out again, low and dangerous, and Vernon finally let go. "Sure thing, officer." His voice was still friendly, still casual, but the warmth had drained out of it. He took a step back, raising both hands now as if to show he wasn't a threat, and his smile stretched wider. Too wide. "Just trying to help. You all have a good one." He turned and walked toward the exit, his footsteps echoing in the sudden silence of the lobby. Reese watched him go, every instinct in her body screaming at her to stop him, to detain him, to do something. But she had no grounds, no evidence, just a dog's reaction and a child's flinch, and a sick, crawling feeling in her gut that whispered something was very, very wrong. The glass doors swung shut behind Vernon, and he disappeared into the late afternoon crowd outside. Reese stood frozen for a long moment, her hands still tight on Axel's lead, her heart pounding against her ribs. The dog finally relaxed, slightly, but his gaze stayed fixed on the doors, his body still coiled and ready. Phoebe let out a shaky breath, and when Reese looked down at her, the girl's eyes were wet with unshed tears. "Hey!" Reese crouched down slowly, bringing herself to Phoebe's level, and Axel immediately shifted closer to the girl, his head low and gentle now, his tail giving a single uncertain wag. "You okay, sweetheart?" Phoebe nodded, but she didn't speak. She reached out with one small hand and buried her fingers in Axel's fur, and the dog leaned into her touch, his dark eyes soft and watchful. Reese felt something twist in her chest, something sharp and protective and furious all at once. She didn't know what had just happened, not yet, but she knew one thing with absolute certainty. Vernon Kitch was not a good Samaritan, and whatever was going on with this little girl, whatever had made Axel react like that, whatever had put that look of silent desperation in Phoebe's eyes, Reese was going to find out. She stood slowly, pulling her radio from her belt, her thumb hovering over the call button. Around her, the station hummed with its usual afternoon rhythm. Officers filing reports, phones ringing, the coffee machine hissing in the break room. Normal, routine, safe, but nothing felt safe anymore. Reese pressed the button. "Dispatch, this is Mallory. I need you to pull security footage from the main lobby for the past 3 weeks. Every entry. I need to see every time Vernon Kitch came through those doors." There was a pause, then a crackle of static. "Copy that. Any particular reason?" Reese looked down at Phoebe, at the way the girl clung to Axel like he was the only solid thing in her world, and she felt her jaw tighten. "Yeah," she said quietly. "I think we've been missing something." The security office was small and windowless, lit by the harsh glow of half a dozen monitors mounted on the wall. Reese stood with her arms crossed, her eyes fixed on the center screen, as Officer Darren Quaid scrolled backward through 3 weeks of lobby footage. Axel lay at her feet, his head resting on his paws, but his ears were still up and alert. The dog hadn't fully relaxed since Vernon left the building. "How far back you want me to go?" Darren asked, his fingers moving over the keyboard with practiced efficiency. He was younger than Reese, barely 30, with a baby face that made witnesses underestimate him, and a sharp, analytical mind that made him invaluable during investigations. He didn't ask why she wanted the footage. He just pulled it. 3 weeks, Reese said. Maybe 4. First time I remember seeing the girl was early October, around the 8th or 9th. Darren nodded and kept scrolling. The timestamp in the corner of the screen blurred backward through days and nights, crowds thinning and swelling and fast forward as the station cycled through shifts and seasons. Reese watched the glass doors open and close hundreds of times, officers coming and going, civilians filing reports, delivery drivers hauling boxes, and then, suddenly, there she was. "Stop." Reese leaned forward, her hand bracing against the edge of the desk. "There, that's her." Darren paused the feed and zoomed in slightly. The image was grainy, but clear enough. Phoebe stood just inside the lobby doors, her pink backpack hanging off one shoulder, her hair pulled back in a lopsided ponytail. She looked even smaller on the screen, fragile and uncertain, glancing around like she wasn't sure where to go or what to do. And then, just a few seconds later, the doors opened again, and Vernon Kitch walked in behind her. His hand rested on her shoulder, guiding her forward, and his expression was calm and pleasant, the same easy smile he'd worn today. The timestamp read, October 7th, 4:18 in the afternoon. "Play it forward," Reese said quietly. "Normal speed." Darren hit the button, and the footage resumed. Vernon walked Phoebe up to the front desk, spoke briefly with the officer on duty. Reese recognized him, a veteran named Hal who'd retired last year, and then stepped back as Phoebe was led toward the break room. Vernon lingered for a moment, chatting with Hal, gesturing toward the doors like he was explaining something. Then he smiled, waved, and left. The whole interaction lasted less than 3 minutes. "Seems normal," Darren said slowly. "Guy brings in a lost kid, hands her off to us, goes on his way. Standard Good Samaritan routine." "Keep going," Reese said, her voice tight. "Next time he shows up." Darren fast-forwarded again, and it didn't take long. 2 days later, October 9th, Vernon appeared again with Phoebe at his side. Same routine, same calm smile, same hand on her shoulder. This time, the officer at the desk was someone Reese didn't recognize, probably a transfer or a temp covering a shift. Vernon spoke, gestured, smiled. Phoebe stood silently beside him, her eyes downcast. Then Vernon left, and Phoebe stayed. "Again," Reese said, her voice tight. October 12th, Vernon and Phoebe. October 14th, Vernon and Phoebe. October 17th, Vernon and Phoebe. Each time the pattern was identical. Vernon would walk her in, speak briefly with whoever was at the desk, and leave. Sometimes he stayed for a minute or two, sometimes he left immediately. But he always left alone, and Phoebe always stayed. The officers always accepted his story without question, because why wouldn't they? A transit worker finding a wandering child and bringing her to the police station was exactly what a responsible citizen was supposed to do. Except, how many times? Reese asked, her stomach twisting into a cold knot. Darren kept scrolling, kept counting. October 19th, October 21st, October 24th. The dates blurred together, each one stamped with the same image. Vernon Kitch, walking through those glass doors with a little girl who never spoke, never smiled, never looked happy to see him. 17, Darren said finally, sitting back in his chair and rubbing his eyes. 17 times in 3 weeks, always between 4 and 6 in the evening. Always the same girl. Reese felt the air leave her lungs. 17 times. She'd known it was more than a few. But 17? How had no one noticed? How had no one thought to ask why a child kept getting lost in the same transit system, brought in by the same man, over and over and over again? Because we trusted the uniform, she thought bitterly. We trusted the smile. "Pull up today's footage," Reese said. "I want to see it again." Darren hesitated, his eyes flicking up to meet hers. "Reese, what's going on?" "Just pull it." He did. The timestamp showed less than an hour ago, and the image quality was sharper, more recent. Vernon walked in with Phoebe, his hand on her shoulder, his expression pleasant and open. He approached the desk, where Reese herself had been standing, finishing up paperwork before she took Axel out for his afternoon patrol. She watched herself glance up, smile briefly, wave Vernon and Phoebe toward the seating area near the community board. She watched Vernon nod and guide the girl forward, and then Axel came into frame. Reese's breath caught. On the screen, the big Malinois trotted into the lobby from the side hallway, his tail wagging loosely, his posture relaxed and easy. He was off duty in that moment, just moving through the building like he always did between calls. But the instant he saw Vernon, the instant his eyes locked on the man standing beside Phoebe, everything changed. His tail dropped, his ears pinned back, his body went stiff and low, and even through the grainy security footage, even without sound, Reese could see the shift in his stance. The way he moved between Vernon and the girl. The way his lips pulled back. And then came the lunge. Darren whistled low under his breath. I've never seen Axel go off like that. Not on a civilian. He hasn't, Reese said quietly. Not once in 4 years. She watched the rest of the footage play out in silence. Watched herself grab Axel's lead. Watched Vernon step back with his hands raised. Watched Phoebe flinch and move closer to the dog. Then Vernon turned and left. And the scene ended with Reese crouched beside the girl, her hand on Axel's head, her expression tight and unreadable. Darren paused the feed and turned in his chair to face her. So what are you thinking? Reese didn't answer right away. She was staring at the frozen image on the screen, at Vernon's face in profile as he walked toward the exit, at the way his smile had thinned just before he turned away. She thought about the way Phoebe had winced when his hand tightened on her shoulder. She thought about the way the girl had clung to Axel like he was the only safe thing in her world. And she thought about 17 visits in 3 weeks. Always the same story. Always a different transit stop. Always just plausible enough that no one had questioned it. I'm thinking, Reese said slowly, that Vernon Kitch isn't bringing Phoebe here because he found her. I think he's bringing her here to see if anyone notices, to see if anyone asks the right questions. She turned to Darren, and her voice dropped to something hard and cold. I think he's testing us, and we've been failing. Darren's face went pale. You think he took her? I think, Reese said, that we need to find out who Phoebe really is, and I think we need to do it before Vernon comes back. Because he would come back. She was sure of it now. Men like Vernon always came back. Reese printed out 17 still frames from the security footage, each one showing Vernon Kitch with his hand on Phoebe's shoulder, each one time-stamped and dated. She spread them across the conference table in the back office like evidence from a crime scene, which, she was becoming more certain by the minute, they were. Darren stood beside her, arms crossed, his usual easygoing expression replaced by something grim and focused. Axel lay beneath the table, his head resting on Reese's boot, his breathing slow and steady, but his eyes still open and watchful. Look at this, Reese said, tapping the first image. October 7th. He says he found her near the Green Line platform. She moved to the next frame. October 9th. Red Line station, northbound side. Another tap. October 12th. Blue Line, downtown transfer hub. Her finger kept moving, image after image, each one marking a different location across the city's sprawling transit network. 17 different stops, Darren. 17 different stories. And not once, did any of us think to ask why this girl keeps getting lost in the exact same system, brought in by the exact same employee. Darren leaned over the table, studying the images more closely. Could be coincidence. Maybe she's got some kind of developmental issue, wanders off, doesn't understand danger. Maybe Vernon's just the guy who keeps finding her. Then where are her parents? Reese's voice came out sharper than she intended, and she forced herself to breathe, to slow down. Where's the frantic mother showing up here looking for her daughter? Where's the father filing a missing persons report? Why hasn't anyone from Child Protective Services been called in to do a home evaluation? She shook her head, staring down at Phoebe's small, blurred face in the photographs. That little girl has been coming here almost every day for 3 weeks, and no one has claimed her. No one has asked about her. No one even knows her last name. The silence that followed was heavy and cold. Darren ran a hand through his hair, his jaw tight, and when he spoke again, his voice was quieter. So what do we do? Reese pulled out her phone and opened the Transit Authority's public employee directory. It took less than 30 seconds to find Vernon Kitch's profile. The photograph matched. Same smile, same clean-cut appearance, same Navy uniform. His listed position was route supervisor, green and red line corridors, and his employee ID number sat just beneath his name like a key waiting to be turned. We run him, Reese said. Full background, employment history, cross-reference his routes with any open cases involving children. She looked up at Darren, and her expression was hard. And we do it quietly. If Vernon gets wind that we're looking into him, he disappears. Darren finished, and so does Phoebe. Reese nodded. She picked up the desk phone and dialed the records division, keeping her voice calm and professional even though her pulse hammered in her throat. The officer who answered was someone she'd worked with before, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Corrine, who didn't waste time with small talk. Records, this is Voss. Corrine, it's Mallory. I need a background pull on a civilian. Priority flag, but keep it off the main bulletin. Name is Vernon Kitch. Employee ID with Metro Transit Authority is 774211. Reese rattled off the number from her phone screen, her eyes still fixed on the photographs spread across the table. I need employment records, residential history, and any flags in the system. Also run his transit route assignments against any open missing persons cases from the past 2 years. Specifically cases involving minors. There was a pause on the other end of the line, the faint sound of keys clicking. Then Corrine's voice came back, quieter and more cautious. You working a case? I'm working a hunch, Reese said, but it's a bad one. Give me 20 minutes. The line went dead. Reese set the phone down and turned back to the table, her hands bracing against the edge as she stared at the images. 17 visits. 17 times Vernon Kitch had walked through those doors with a little girl who never said a word, never looked him in the eye, never reached for his hand. 17 times he'd handed her off to the police like he was doing them a favor, and 17 times they'd thanked him and let him walk away. And all the while, Phoebe had followed Axel through the station like the dog was the only anchor she had left in the world. Reese glanced down at Axel, and the Malinois lifted his head slightly, his dark eyes meeting hers. She reached down and scratched behind his ears, and his tail thumped once against the floor. You knew, she murmured. Didn't you, boy? You knew something was wrong. Dogs didn't lie. They didn't second-guess their instincts or talk themselves out of gut feelings. They just reacted. And Axel had reacted the moment he saw Vernon Kitch today, the same way he would react to a suspect fleeing a scene or a handler in danger. He'd seen a threat. He'd smelled it. And he'd done exactly what he was trained to do. He'd protected the innocent. Darren pulled out a chair and sat down heavily, his eyes scanning the photographs again. If you're right about this, if Vernon's been using the station as some kind of proving ground, he trailed off, shaking his head. Why? What's the end game? Why keep bringing her back? Control, Reese said quietly. He's conditioning her, showing her that even when she's surrounded by cops, even when she's inside a police station, no one's going to save her. No one's going to ask the right questions. He's teaching her that he's untouchable. She felt her hands curl into fists on the table. And he's been teaching us too, training us to see him as helpful, as safe, so when he finally decides to take her somewhere else, somewhere we can't follow, we won't even realize she's gone. The words hung in the air like smoke, and Reese felt something twist deep in her chest, anger and guilt and a cold creeping horror that made her want to put her fist through the wall. They'd failed. All of them. Every officer who'd smiled at Vernon and thanked him for being a good citizen. Every shift supervisor who'd logged Phoebe's presence without asking for identification or parental contact. Every person who'd seen that quiet, frightened little girl and assumed someone else would handle it. They'd all failed her. Darren's phone buzzed, and he glanced down at the screen. Corrine's calling you back. Reese snatched up the desk phone on the first ring. Mallory? Got your pull, Corrine said, and her voice was tight. You were right to flag this one. Vernon Kitch, 42 years old, clean record on paper, no arrests, no complaints, been with Metro Transit for 6 years. But when I ran his route history against the missing persons database, she paused, and Reese heard papers rustling in the background. 4 open cases, Reese. 4 kids reported missing over the past 2 years. All of them last seen near transit stations, along routes Vernon was assigned to at the time of disappearance. Reese's blood went cold. 4. 2 girls, 2 boys, ages 6 to 9. Different neighborhoods, different schools, no obvious connections between the families. But every single one of them vanished within a half-mile radius of a green or red line stop, during Vernon's shift windows. Kareen's voice dropped lower. And here's the kicker. 3 months ago, Vernon put in a request to transfer to a new route. Guess which one? Reese closed her eyes. Blue Line, downtown corridor. Bingo, right where you said he claimed to have found the girl today. Kareen exhaled slowly. Reese, if this guy's been operating under our noses for 2 years. I know. Reese opened her eyes and stared down at the photographs again, at Phoebe's small face repeated 17 times across the table. Send everything you've got to my terminal. And Kareen, keep this off the main channels for now. I don't want anyone tipping him off before we're ready to move. Copy that. And Reese? Kareen's voice softened just slightly. Get that little girl somewhere safe. I will. Reese hung up and turned to Darren, and the look on her face must have said everything, because he was already standing, already reaching for his radio. We need to bring in the captain, he said, and we need a plan for when Vernon comes back. If he comes back, Darren said. Reese glanced down at Axel, at the way the dog's ears pricked forward, and his gaze fixed on the door, like he was already waiting, like he knew. He'll come back, she said quietly. Men like Vernon always do. Captain Iris Langford arrived in the conference room less than 10 minutes after Reese's call, her expression already set in the hard, focused lines of someone preparing for the worst. She was in her mid-50s, gray streaking through her pulled-back hair, and she'd spent 23 years working cases that ranged from domestic violence to organized crime. She didn't waste time with pleasantries or questions about procedure. She walked straight to the table, looked down at the 17 photographs spread across its surface, and her jaw tightened. Tell me, she said simply. Reese laid it out in clear, clinical terms. The timeline of Phoebe's appearances, the pattern of different transit stops, and identical stories. Axel's violent reaction to Vernon that afternoon, and finally the database match that Kareen had pulled. 4 missing children over 2 years, all last seen near Vernon Kitch's assigned routes. All still unsolved, all still missing. When she finished, the silence in the room felt like a weight pressing down on all of them. Captain Langford stood motionless for a long moment, her eyes moving slowly across the photographs, her hands resting flat on the table. Then she looked up at Reese, and her voice was low and steady. Where's the girl now? Break room with Officer Chen, Reese said. Supervised. Door locked. Axel stayed with her until I came back here. Langford nodded. And Vernon? Left the building 53 minutes ago. He clocked out at the downtown transit hub at 5:14. His shift officially ended at 6, so he's off the clock now, but there's no indication he knows we're looking at him. Yet, Darren added quietly. Langford's gaze shifted to him, then back to Reese. You think he's coming back for her? It wasn't a question. Reese nodded anyway. I think he's been using us as a holding location, conditioning Phoebe, like I said, but also conditioning us. We've accepted his story 17 times. We've built trust. Now he's ready to move to the next phase, and that means taking her somewhere permanent. Her voice hardened. Somewhere we won't find her. Langford's expression didn't change, but something flickered in her eyes, something cold and furious that Reese recognized because she felt it too. The captain reached for her radio and keyed it once, her voice clipped and precise. Dispatch, this is Langford. I need an immediate bolo on Vernon Kitch, Metro Transit Authority employee, ID 774211. Do not approach, do not detain, observe and report location only. Flag as person of interest in an active investigation. Priority 1. Copy? Copy, Captain. Bolo going out now. Langford set the radio down and pulled out her phone, her fingers moving quickly across the screen. I'm calling in county. If this guy's been operating across multiple jurisdictions, we're going to need task force coordination and warrant support. She glanced up at Reese. But that takes time, and if Vernon shows up here before we have everything in place, we can tame him, Reese said, quietly. No alarms, no panic, nothing that spooks him into running. We bring him in for questioning, and we hold him while you get the warrants. On what grounds? Darren asked. We don't have probable cause yet. Just a database correlation and a dog's reaction. Reese's jaw tightened. He was right, and that was the problem. They had pieces of a picture, fragments of a pattern. but nothing concrete enough to justify an arrest. Nothing that would hold up if Vernon lawyered up or demanded to walk. They needed more. They needed evidence, or they needed Vernon to make a mistake. We have a vulnerable minor in protective custody with no verified guardian, Langford said slowly, her eyes still on her phone. And we have a civilian who's been in repeated contact with that minor under questionable circumstances. That's enough to justify a welfare check and a voluntary interview. She looked up, her gaze sharp. If Vernon refuses to cooperate or tries to leave with the girl, that changes things. That gives us grounds. Reese nodded. It was thin, but it might be enough. What do we tell Phoebe? Langford's expression softened just slightly, and for a moment the hard lines of command gave way to something more human. We tell her she's safe, and we make damn sure it's true. The plan came together quickly after that. Darren would stay in the conference room monitoring security feeds, watching for any sign of Vernon returning to the building or approaching the surrounding blocks. 2 uniformed officers, Garcia and Tan, both veterans with steady nerves, would be positioned near the front desk and lobby exits, plain clothes and low profile, ready to move if Vernon walked through those doors. Captain Langford would coordinate with County and prepare the paperwork for emergency custody and search warrants, working the legal angles while Reese handled the tactical side. And Reese would stay with Phoebe. She would keep the girl calm, keep her safe, and if Vernon came back, she would be the one standing between him and the door. Axel would be there too, because the dog had been right from the beginning. Reese walked back to the break room, her boots quiet on the tile, her radio clipped to her belt, and her sidearm a familiar weight at her hip. She paused outside the door, took a slow breath, and then knocked twice before stepping inside. Officer Chen looked up from where he sat near the vending machines, his posture relaxed, but his eyes alert. Phoebe was curled up on the worn couch in the corner, her pink backpack clutched to her chest, her gaze fixed on the floor. She looked even smaller in the fluorescent light, fragile and exhausted, like a bird that had been flying too long and didn't know where to land. Axel lay on the floor beside the couch, his head resting near Phoebe's feet, and when Reese entered the room, his tail thumped once in greeting. The girl's eyes flicked up briefly, then down again, but her hand moved, just slightly, to rest on the dog's shoulder. "Hey, Chen," Reese said quietly. "You're good here for a few more minutes?" Chen nodded. All quiet. She hasn't said much, but she ate the granola bar I gave her. So that's something. Reese managed a faint smile. "Thanks. I'll take over now." Chen stood and moved toward the door, pausing just long enough to murmur, "Langford filled me in. We've got eyes on every entrance. If that guy shows up, we'll see him." "Good." Reese waited until the door closed behind him, then walked slowly across the room and lowered herself onto the opposite end of the couch. She didn't sit too close, didn't crowd Phoebe or force eye contact. She just settled in, her elbows resting on her knees, her hands loosely folded, and let the silence stretch out for a moment. Axel shifted slightly, his gaze moving between Reese and the girl, and his tail wagged again, slow and gentle. "You're safe here, Phoebe," Reese said quietly. "You know that, right?" The girl didn't answer. Her fingers tightened in Axel's fur, and her thin shoulders hunched forward like she was trying to make herself even smaller. Reese swallowed the sharp ache in her throat and kept her voice steady. "We're going to figure this out. We're going to find your family, your real family, and we're going to make sure no one hurts you again." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "But I need you to trust me. Can you do that?" For a long moment, Phoebe didn't move. Then, slowly, so slowly it almost broke Reese's heart, the girl nodded. Just once, just barely, it was enough. Reese's radio crackled softly, and Darren's voice came through low and tense. "Reese, we've got movement. Vernon just entered the north parking lot. He's heading for the main entrance." Reese's pulse spiked, but her voice stayed calm. "Copy. I'm in position." She stood smoothly, her hand resting on Axel's head for just a second before she moved toward the door. The dog rose with her, his body tense and ready, and Phoebe's eyes went wide, not with fear of what was coming, but with something else, something that looked like hope. Stay here with Officer Chen, Reese said gently. Axel and I are going to handle this. You're going to be okay. She stepped into the hallway, and the door clicked shut behind her. Darren's voice came through the radio again, sharper now. He's in the lobby. He's asking for Phoebe. Reese's jaw tightened, and she felt Axel press closer to her leg, his ears pinned back, and his gaze fixed forward. She could see the glass doors at the end of the corridor, could see Vernon's silhouette through the frosted panels, could see the way he stood with his hands in his pockets, and that same easy smile on his face. He thought he was untouchable. He thought he'd won. Reese keyed her radio one last time. All units, hold position until my signal. And then she walked forward, Axel at her side, and every step felt like the closing of a trap that Vernon Kitch had built for himself. Reese pushed through the hallway door and stepped into the lobby, and the fluorescent lights felt too bright, the air too still. Vernon stood near the front desk, with his hands in his pockets, his Navy transit uniform crisp and clean, his expression open and pleasant. He was talking to Officer Garcia, gesturing casually like he'd just stopped by to chat. And when he saw Reese emerge from the corridor, his smile widened. Hey, Officer Mallory, he called out, his voice warm and familiar. I was just asking about Phoebe. Wanted to make sure she got home okay. Figured I'd save you all the trouble and give her a ride myself. I'm heading that direction anyway. Reese kept her pace steady, her boots clicking softly against the tile, and Axel moved beside her like a shadow. The dog's body was low and tense, his ears pinned flat, and she could feel the coiled energy radiating off him, the same energy that had exploded into violence earlier that afternoon. She rested her hand lightly on his head, a silent command to hold, and Axel obeyed, but his gaze never left Vernon. That's thoughtful of you, Reese said evenly, stopping a few feet away and positioning herself directly between Vernon and the hallway that led to the break room. But we've got it covered. Phoebe's being taken care of. Vernon's smile didn't falter, but something shifted behind his eyes, something quick and calculating. Oh, well, I've been bringing her here for weeks now. I know the routine. Figured it'd be easier for everyone if I just... We've got it covered, Reese repeated, and this time her voice was firmer. She let the silence hang for a moment, watching Vernon's face, watching the way his hands shifted slightly in his pockets, watching the way his gaze flicked past her toward the hallway, then back again. He was looking for Phoebe, calculating, planning. Garcia moved closer from the desk, his posture casual but his hand resting near his belt. And across the lobby, Reese caught a glimpse of Officer Tan positioning himself near the exit. Vernon didn't seem to notice. His attention was still fixed on Reese, and his smile had thinned just enough to show the edges of something else underneath. Look, Vernon said, his tone shifting to something more reasonable, almost apologetic. I get it. You're being cautious. But I've been helping that kid for weeks, and I just want to make sure she gets somewhere safe. That's all I'm trying to do here. Then maybe you can help us with something else, Reese said. She kept her voice calm, professional, like they were just two people having a conversation. Like her pulse wasn't hammering in her throat. We've been trying to track down Phoebe's parents, but we're having trouble locating any contact information. You said you found her near the Green Line platform today. Do you remember exactly where? Maybe there's a nearby residence we missed. Vernon hesitated, just for a second, just long enough for Reese to see the calculation running behind his eyes. Yeah, it was near the north entrance, by the bike racks. She was just standing there. And the other times? Reese pressed gently. You've brought her in a few times now, right? Were those always the same location? Vernon's smile flickered. No, different stops. She wanders a lot, like I said before. Right, Reese nodded slowly. Must be hard to keep track of, all those different locations. I just try to help when I see a kid who needs it. Vernon's voice was still pleasant, but there was an edge creeping in now, something tight and defensive. Is there a problem here, officer? Not at all, Reese said. We just need to ask you a few follow-up questions. Standard procedure when we have a minor in protective custody with no verified guardian. You understand? Vernon's hands came out of his pockets, and he raised them slightly in a gesture that was meant to look open and cooperative, but felt rehearsed. Sure, yeah, whatever you need, but after that, I really should be getting home. Long shift, you know? This won't take long, Reese said. She gestured toward the hallway behind her. There's a conference room just down the hall. More private. We can talk there. For a moment, Vernon didn't move. His gaze flicked past Reese again, toward the corridor, and she saw his jaw tighten. He was weighing his options, calculating the risk, deciding whether to cooperate or to push back, or to run. Axel's growl rolled out low and steady, a sound that vibrated through the lobby like a warning, and Vernon's eyes snapped down to the dog. The pleasant mask slipped, just for a second, and Reese saw something cold and ugly underneath, something that looked at Axel not with fear, but with recognition, like he knew the dog had seen through him from the start. I don't think I need to answer any more questions, Vernon said quietly. His voice had changed completely now, flat and controlled, stripped of all the warmth and friendliness he'd been wearing like a costume. I brought a lost kid to the station. That's it. If you want to talk to me further, you can contact my union rep. Reese didn't move. You're free to go, Mr. Kitch. But Phoebe stays here until we locate her legal guardians. I'm sure you understand. Vernon's expression hardened. She doesn't have guardians. That's the whole point. She's a street kid. No one's looking for her. The words came out too fast, too certain, and the moment they left his mouth, Reese saw him realize his mistake. His face went blank, and he took a step backward toward the exit. I need to go. Mr. Ketch, Reese started, but Vernon was already moving, his body turning toward the glass doors, his hand reaching for the handle. Axel lunged. The dog moved faster than Reese could react, his leash snapping taut as he surged forward with a snarl that echoed off the walls. Vernon stumbled backward, his hands coming up instinctively, and Tan stepped in from the side, his voice firm and commanding. Sir, stop where you are. Hands where I can see them. Vernon froze. His chest was heaving, his face flushed, and his eyes darted between Tan, Garcia, Reese, and the dog that stood between him and the exit like a living barrier. For a long moment, no one moved. Then Vernon's shoulders sagged, and something in his expression cracked, not into fear or regret, but into something closer to resignation. Like he'd been caught in a game he'd thought he was winning. I want a lawyer, he said flatly. You'll get one, Reese said. She nodded to Garcia and Tan, and the two officers moved in smoothly, flanking Vernon and guiding his hands behind his back. The cuffs clicked into place with a sound that felt final, and Vernon didn't resist. He just stood there, staring at Reese with cold, empty eyes. You don't know what you're doing, he said quietly. That girl, she's got no one. I was helping her. No, Reese said, and her voice was hard as stone. You were using her, and now it's over. Garcia led Vernon toward the side hallway, and Tan followed close behind, his hand on his radio as he called in the arrest. The lobby fell silent again, and Reese stood there for a moment, her hands still tight on Axel's leash, her pulse slowly coming down from the spike of adrenaline. The dog sat at her feet now, his body stayed tense, but his gaze calm and focused. And when she looked down at him, she felt something loosen in her chest. Good boy, she murmured, and Axel's tail wagged once. Captain Langford's voice crackled through the radio, steady and controlled. Subject in custody. Counties en route with warrants. We're moving on his residence and his transit locker now. Reese keyed her radio, her voice quiet. Copy. I'm going back to Phoebe. She turned and walked back down the corridor, Axel at her side, and with every step, the weight of what had just happened settled over her like a heavy coat. They'd stopped him. They'd caught him before he could take Phoebe away, before he could add her name to the list of children who'd vanished into his carefully constructed routine. But the other four, the ones who disappeared over the past 2 years, one step at a time. Right now, Phoebe was safe, and that had to be enough. The interrogation room was small and windowless, lit by a single overhead fixture that cast harsh shadows across the metal table bolted to the floor. Vernon Kitch sat on one side in his Navy transit uniform, his hands cuffed in front of him, his expression blank and unreadable. Across from him sat Detective Lorna Quaid from County Major Crimes, a woman in her late 40s with sharp eyes and a patient, methodical approach that had broken more suspects than Reese could count. Reese stood outside the room, watching through the one-way glass, her arms crossed over her chest, Axel lying quietly at her feet. Captain Langford stood beside her, silent and still, her gaze fixed on Vernon's face. They'd been in there for 40 minutes now, and Vernon hadn't said a word beyond repeating his demand for a lawyer. But his silence didn't matter anymore. The warrants had come through 20 minutes ago, and the search teams were already tearing through Vernon's apartment and his transit locker. And what they were finding was enough to bury him. Langford's phone buzzed, and she glanced down at the screen, then handed it silently to Reese. The message was from the lead detective on the search team, and it was short and damning. Transit locker, zip ties, duct tape, 2 syringes pre-filled with sedative, children's clothing sizes 4 to 8, burner phone with deleted messages, apartment, external hard drive with encrypted files, more clothing, photos of transit stations, handwritten notes with schedules and routes. Forensics is pulling everything now. Reese felt her stomach twist. She handed the phone back to Langford without a word, her gaze returning to Vernon through the glass. He looked so ordinary, so calm, like he was waiting for a bus, not sitting in an interrogation room with evidence piling up around him that would put him away for the rest of his life. "We've got him," Langford said quietly. "Even if he doesn't talk, we've got him." Reese nodded, but the relief she'd expected to feel didn't come. Not yet, because there were still 4 other children out there, 4 names on a list that stretched back 2 years, 4 families still waiting for answers that might never come. She looked down at Axel, and the dog's dark eyes met hers, steady and calm. He'd known. From the very first moment Vernon walked into that lobby, Axel had known. And now, because of him, Phoebe was safe. That had to be enough for now. The door to the break room opened quietly, and Reese stepped inside. Phoebe was still curled up on the couch, but she looked different now. Less rigid, less terrified. Officer Chen sat nearby with a tablet, showing her something that made the corner of her mouth twitch upward just slightly. When Reese entered, Phoebe looked up, and her hand reached instinctively toward Axel as the dog crossed the room and settled beside her. "Hey," Reese said gently, lowering herself onto the couch. "I've got some news." Phoebe's eyes widened, and her fingers curled tighter into Axel's fur. Reese kept her voice soft and steady, the same tone she'd use with any frightened witness, calm, reassuring, honest. "We found your parents," Reese said. "Your real parents. They've been looking for you since the day you disappeared. They're on their way here right now." For a moment, Phoebe didn't react. She just stared at Reese, like she wasn't sure whether to believe her. Like maybe this was another trick, another test. Then her lower lip started to tremble, and her eyes filled with tears, and she buried her face in Axel's shoulder and sobbed. Reese reached out slowly and rested her hand on Phoebe's back, and the girl didn't pull away. She just cried, deep shaking sobs that sounded like they'd been locked inside her for weeks. Axel stayed perfectly still, his head resting gently against the girl's side, his breathing slow and calm, and Reese felt her own throat tighten. "You're safe now," she murmured. "You're going home." It took another 2 hours for Phoebe's parents to arrive. They came through the station doors pale and shaking, their eyes red from crying. And the moment they saw their daughter, the mother let out a sound that was half sob, half prayer. Phoebe ran to them, and they caught her in their arms and held her like they would never let go again. Reese stood back near the front desk, watching the reunion with her arms crossed loosely over her chest. Axel sitting quietly at her side. Captain Langford stood beside her, and neither of them spoke. There wasn't anything that needed to be said. After a few minutes, Phoebe's father looked up, his face streaked with tears, and crossed the lobby toward Reese. He didn't say anything at first. He just held out his hand, and when Reese took it, he gripped it tightly, his voice breaking. "Thank you," he whispered. "Thank you." Reese nodded, her throat too tight for words. She glanced down at Axel, and the father followed her gaze. He crouched slowly, his hand reaching out, and Axel leaned forward and nuzzled his palm. The man's breath hitched, and he rested his forehead against the dog's shoulder for a long moment before standing again. She talked about him, he said quietly. The whole ride here. She said a dog protected her. She said he wouldn't let anyone hurt her. Reese swallowed hard and managed a faint smile. He's good at his job. Phoebe's father nodded, wiped his eyes, and returned to his family. A few minutes later they left together, Phoebe holding her mother's hand and looking back over her shoulder one last time at Axel. The dog's tail wagged once, and then the doors closed behind them, and they were gone. The station felt quieter after that. The adrenaline that had carried Reese through the past few hours drained away, leaving her exhausted and hollow. She sat in the break room long after her shift ended, a cold cup of coffee in her hands, staring at the wall. Axel lay on the floor beside her chair, his head resting on his paws, his eyes half closed, but still watchful. Captain Langford appeared in the doorway, her uniform jacket gone and her sleeves rolled up. She didn't ask if Reese was okay. She just pulled out a chair and sat down across from her. "County's opening a task force," Langford said quietly. "They're going back through every missing child case in the region for the past 5 years, cross-referencing transit routes and timelines. If there are more victims, they'll find them." Reese nodded slowly. "And the 4 we already know about?" Langford's expression darkened. "Vernon's not talking, but forensics pulled data off that hard drive. Photos, metadata, location stamps. They're working through it now." She paused, then added, "They think they'll be able to identify at least 2 of the children, maybe more." It wasn't closure, not yet, but it was something, a thread to follow, a chance that those families might finally get answers. "Phoebe's family wants to come back," Langford said after a moment. "In a few weeks, once things settle, they want to thank you properly, and they want their daughter to see Axel again." Reese looked down at the dog, and Axel's tail thumped softly against the floor. She reached down and scratched behind his ears, and something in her chest finally loosened. "Yeah," she said quietly, "we'd like that." 3 months later, on a cold Saturday morning in January, Phoebe walked into the station lobby holding her mother's hand. She was wearing a bright yellow coat, and her hair was pulled back in a neat braid, and when she saw Reese standing near the front desk, her face lit up. "Officer Mallory," she called out, her voice clear and strong, and Reese felt a smile tug at her lips. "Hey, Phoebe." The girl ran forward, her mother following close behind, and she stopped just in front of Reese, not shy anymore, not frightened, just eager and alive. Axel trotted over from the hallway, his tail wagging, and Phoebe dropped to her knees and threw her arms around the dog's neck. "I missed you," she whispered into his fur, and Axel's tail wagged harder. Phoebe's mother smiled, her eyes bright with tears, and handed Reese a small envelope. "She wanted to write him a letter," she said softly. "We told her he can't read, but she insisted." Reese took the envelope, her throat tight, and tucked it carefully into her pocket. "I'll make sure he gets it." They stayed for half an hour, Phoebe sitting on the floor with Axel and talking about school and her friends and the new puppy her parents had adopted. She was different now, brighter, steadier, safe. And when she finally stood to leave, she hugged Reese tightly and whispered, "Thank you for believing me." Reese crouched down to meet her eyes. "Axel believed you first." Phoebe smiled, scratched the dog's ears one last time, and walked out the doors with her family. Reese watched them go, then looked down at Axel, and the dog looked back at her with those calm, knowing eyes. That night, after her shift ended and the station had emptied out, Reese sat alone in the break room and opened Phoebe's letter. The handwriting was careful and uneven, the letters drawn with the focus of a child who was still learning to shape words. "Dear Axel, thank you for being my friend when I was scared. You are the bravest dog in the whole world. I love you. Your friend, Phoebe." Reese folded the letter carefully and slipped it into her locker, then walked back out into the quiet hallway. Axel was waiting for her by the front desk, his leash already clipped to his collar, his tail wagging slowly. She knelt down beside him and rested her forehead against his, and for a long moment they just stayed there, protector and partner, silent and steady. "Good boy," she murmured. "Best damn dog I've ever known." Axel's tail wagged once, and together they walked out into the cold night, ready for whatever came next.